April 6, 1917, the Wilhelmstrasse, Berlin. General Erich von Falkenhayn adjusted his spectacles as he reviewed the latest intelligence reports from across the Atlantic. The sound of rain against the windows of the German High Command headquarters provided a steady rhythm as staff officers moved quietly through corridors lined with maps of European battlefields. 3 years of grinding warfare had reduced the Western Front to a mathematical equation of attrition, and by every calculation, Germany was winning that equation. The Americans had finally declared war, but Falkenhayn permitted himself a thin smile as he studied the numbers before him. The United States possessed a standing army of merely 127,500 officers and soldiers scattered across an entire continent. Even if they mobilized every available man, the Atlantic Ocean stretched 3,000 miles between American factories and French trenches. Time, the general believed, remained Germany's greatest ally. What Falkenhayn could not foresee was that within 18 months, over 1 million American soldiers would be standing on European soil, supported by an industrial machine that would redefine the very concept of modern warfare. The mathematics of victory were about to be rewritten by a nation that would transform from military irrelevance to global dominance faster than any empire in human history. The German assessment of American military potential reflected decades of European military doctrine and recent observations of American performance. Lieutenant Colonel Wilhelm Groener, chief of the railway section of the German General Staff, had compiled exhaustive studies of American industrial capacity and concluded that the United States lacked both the organizational structure and cultural discipline necessary for large-scale military operations. American society, he reported, remained fundamentally civilian in nature, obsessed with commercial pursuits rather than martial excellence. The German military establishment had witnessed American forces during the Spanish-American War of 1898, noting their reliance on volunteer militias and their struggles with basic logistics over relatively short distances. Surely, the Germans reasoned, a nation that required months to deploy 280,000 troops to the Philippines could never transport and sustain millions of soldiers across the submarine-infested Atlantic. General Helmuth von Moltke the Younger, architect of the Schlieffen Plan, had written extensively about American military limitations in his strategic assessments. The Americans possessed abundant raw materials and industrial potential, he acknowledged, but they lacked the Prussian military tradition that had forged the German officer corps through centuries of European warfare. American soldiers, he observed, were individualistic, undisciplined, and unaccustomed to the brutal realities of modern industrial combat. The trenches of Verdun and the Somme had consumed entire generations of European youth, creating a level of military hardening that no civilian society could replicate quickly. The German General Staff calculated that even under optimal conditions, the United States would require 2 full years to train, equip, and transport sufficient forces to meaningfully impact the European balance of power. These calculations appeared mathematically sound when measured against historical precedent. The mobilization of the Prussian army during the Franco-Prussian War of 1870 had required 8 months, and represented the pinnacle of 19th century military efficiency. The British Expeditionary Force, with centuries of military tradition and the world's largest navy, had deployed only 150,000 men to France in the war's opening months. Russia, despite possessing the world's largest standing army, had struggled to maintain supply lines across distances far shorter than the Atlantic crossing. By every metric of military science known to European commanders, the American entry into the war represented a long-term strategic concern rather than an immediate tactical threat. The German submarine campaign, launched with renewed intensity in February 1917, was specifically designed to strangle American logistics before they could develop momentum. Admiral Henning von Holtzendorff, chief of the German naval staff, presented calculations showing that unrestricted submarine warfare would sink 600,000 tons of Allied shipping monthly, making large-scale American troop transport impossible. German U-boats had already demonstrated their effectiveness against Allied convoys, sending hundreds of vessels to the bottom of the Atlantic. The mathematical equation seemed irrefutable. Each transport ship sunk would eliminate hundreds of potential American soldiers from the European theatre. Each supply vessel destroyed would deny thousands of tons of material to Allied forces. The German Navy possessed sufficient submarines to maintain this campaign indefinitely, while American shipbuilding capacity remained limited by peacetime industrial priorities. Yet by June 1917, the first harbingers of miscalculation began appearing in German intelligence reports. American destroyers had begun arriving in European waters not in the expected dozens, but in formations that suggested industrial production capabilities far exceeding German estimates. The USS Wadsworth, leading the first American naval squadron to reach Queenstown Island, was followed by 5 additional destroyers within days. German naval observers noted the vessel's advanced design and superior construction quality, but more disturbing was the speed of their deployment. American shipyards were launching destroyers at intervals that defied European understanding of industrial timelines. Simultaneously, reports from German agents in American ports described transportation infrastructure developing at unprecedented rates. The Port of New York had expanded its facilities by 300% within 6 months, constructing new piers, warehouses, and loading facilities with an efficiency that German engineers found difficult to comprehend. Railroad networks were being reconfigured to channel the entire continental economy toward military production and transportation. What German planners had dismissed as American commercial excess was revealing itself as latent military potential that could be activated with stunning rapidity. The first American troops began arriving in France in June 1917, initially confirming German expectations of limited scale and gradual deployment. The 1st Infantry Division, comprising approximately 14,000 soldiers, disembarked at Saint-Nazaire to ceremonial fanfare but represented little immediate threat to German strategic calculations. These forces required extensive training, equipment, and integration with Allied command structures before achieving combat effectiveness. German intelligence officers noted the troops' obvious inexperience and their dependence on British and French equipment for basic operations. The Americans had arrived without artillery, without transport vehicles, without the thousands of specialized weapon systems that modern warfare demanded. However, German observers also noted troubling characteristics among these American forces. The soldiers were physically larger than their European counterparts, better fed, and possessed mechanical aptitudes that reflected their industrial backgrounds. Unlike European peasant conscripts, many American soldiers understood engines, electronics, and complex machinery from civilian experience. Their officers demonstrated initiative and adaptability that contrasted sharply with the rigid hierarchical structures of European armies. Most concerning, these forces represented merely the advance guard of what American officials promised would be millions of additional troops. By autumn 1917, the mathematical foundations of German strategic planning began showing cracks that would soon become chasms. Intelligence reports documented American troop shipments arriving weekly rather than monthly, with individual convoys carrying thousands rather than hundreds of soldiers. The port of Hoboken alone was processing 30,000 American troops monthly, while additional embarkation points in Virginia and New Jersey handled similar volumes. German submarine commanders reported engaging Allied convoys of unprecedented size, protected by destroyer screens that made successful attacks increasingly difficult and costly. The industrial transformation occurring across the American continent defied every precedent in German military experience. Factories that had produced agricultural machinery were retooling to manufacture artillery pieces. Automotive plants were converting to tank production. Shipyards were launching transport vessels at rates that exceeded the combined output of all European nations. Between April and December 1917, American industrial production increased by 32%, while gross national product expanded by nearly 20%. These numbers represented not gradual mobilization, but instantaneous economic transformation on a scale that European military planners had never witnessed. By December 1917, German strategic assessments required complete revision. Over 175,000 American troops had reached European soil, with transportation rates accelerating monthly rather than declining as German submarine warfare had predicted. The soldiers arriving in winter convoys demonstrated improved training, better equipment, and growing coordination with Allied forces. More ominously, American industrial production was beginning to supply not only American forces, but also British and French armies with equipment, ammunition, and supplies that exceeded anything previously available. General Erich Ludendorff, now effectively commanding German military strategy, recognized that the window for German victory was closing with terrifying speed. The spring offensive of 1918 would represent Germany's final opportunity to achieve decisive victory before American military might could reach full deployment. Every day of delay meant thousands of additional American troops, millions of additional artillery shells, an exponentially increasing Allied material superiority. What Ludendorff could not yet comprehend was that his race against time had already been lost, not on the battlefields of France, but in the factories of Detroit, the shipyards of New York, and the training camps of a nation that was about to demonstrate the true meaning of industrial warfare. February 15, 1918, the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute, Berlin. Professor Heinrich Weber pressed his fingers against his temples as he stared at the intelligence photographs scattered across his mahogany desk. Steam rose from his untouched coffee, while the morning light filtered through frost-covered windows, illuminating images that defied everything German science understood about industrial capability. The photographs, taken by reconnaissance aircraft over the port of New York, showed something that violated the fundamental laws of manufacturing physics. 17 ocean liners were being loaded simultaneously, their holds swallowing endless streams of equipment, ammunition, and soldiers. Each vessel carried more men than entire German divisions. Weber had spent 3 decades studying industrial production rates and had authored the definitive German treatise on factory efficiency, yet the mathematics before him suggested the impossible. The Americans were not simply mobilizing, they were manufacturing victory at a rate that exceeded human comprehension. What Weber witnessed in those grainy photographs was the birth of a new form of warfare, one where industrial capacity would matter more than tactical brilliance, where assembly lines would prove more decisive than battle lines. The German Empire, master of military science for half a century, was about to receive an education in American mass production that would redefine the nature of modern conflict forever. The scale of American mobilization beginning to reach European shores in early 1918 shattered every assumption German military planners had constructed about logistical limitations. Captain Franz von Richthofen, reviewing intelligence reports between aerial missions, noted that American supply convoys were arriving with mathematical precision every 4 days, rather than the sporadic intervals German doctrine predicted. Each convoy carried not hundreds, but thousands of tons of artillery shells, medical supplies, and replacement equipment. The Americans had solved the submarine threat not through superior naval tactics, but through overwhelming numerical advantage. For every transport ship German U-boats sank, 3 more appeared on the horizon. German field commanders began reporting encounters with American forces that contradicted every intelligence assessment of American military capabilities. Major Wilhelm Hübner, commanding the 3rd Bavarian Reserve Division near Château Thierry, observed American Marines advancing under artillery fire with discipline that matched veteran German units. These were not the soft civilians German propaganda had promised. They moved with mechanical precision, maintained unit cohesion under bombardment, and demonstrated marksmanship that reflected extensive training with superior equipment. More disturbing still, captured American soldiers revealed that they represented only the advance guard of divisions numbering in the millions. By March 1918, German intelligence officers were compiling reports that read like science fiction rather than military assessments. American factories were producing artillery shells at rates of 100,000 rounds daily. Single manufacturing plants were turning out more ammunition in a week than entire German provinces could produce in a month. The Bethlehem Steel Corporation alone had delivered 65,000 tons of forged military products and £70 million of armour plate to Allied forces. These numbers represented not gradual industrial conversion, but complete economic transformation achieved in months rather than years. The German Spring Offensive, launched on March 21, 1918, was explicitly designed as a desperate race against the American arrival. General Ludendorff had calculated that German forces possessed a narrow window of opportunity before American reinforcements could reach decisive numbers. Initial German advances seemed to confirm this strategy, with German troops pushing 40 miles beyond their starting positions and capturing 90,000 Allied prisoners. Yet even as German forces advanced, American transportation continued accelerating. Intelligence reports documented 10,000 American soldiers arriving in French ports daily, a rate of deployment that exceeded the population of entire German cities. The psychological impact on German forces proved as devastating as any battlefield defeat. Soldiers who had endured 3 years of rationed ammunition watched American artillery units fire without restriction. German machine gunners allocated 50 rounds per day observed American forces expending thousands of rounds in single engagements. The disparity created a sense of inevitable defeat that undermined German morale more effectively than Allied propaganda. Letters intercepted by German censors revealed soldiers writing home about fighting an enemy with unlimited resources while German forces conserved their last cartridges. American industrial mobilization had achieved something German military science deemed theoretically impossible. The United States had transformed from a peacetime economy, producing civilian goods, to a military machine, outproducing all European nations combined within 18 months. American steel production exceeded German output by 400%. American explosive manufacturing capabilities dwarfed German chemical industries. Most remarkably, this industrial transformation occurred while simultaneously training and transporting the largest military force in American history. By May 1918, over 500,000 American troops had reached European soil, with transportation rates accelerating rather than declining, as German submarine warfare had predicted. The soldiers arriving in spring convoys demonstrated combat readiness that reflected months of intensive training with unlimited ammunition and superior equipment. American artillery units possessed more heavy guns than entire German Army Corps. American aviation squadrons flew aircraft produced in quantities that exceeded German manufacturing by factors of 10. The material advantage had become so overwhelming that German tactical superiority could no longer compensate for numerical inferiority. German commanders began reporting encounters with American logistics that defied military precedent. Supply trains extending for miles delivered fresh equipment daily to American positions. Replacement soldiers arrived faster than combat losses could deplete unit strength. American field hospitals possessed medical equipment and pharmaceutical supplies that exceeded what German civilian hospitals had available. The Americans had created a military system that assumed unlimited resources and operated accordingly, violating every principle of conservation that German doctrine considered essential for sustained warfare. The Second Battle of the Marne in July 1918 provided German forces with their first comprehensive encounter with American military might at full deployment. Over 270,000 American troops participated alongside French forces in a counter-offensive that demonstrated American tactical competence, supported by industrial abundance. German defensive positions that had withstood 3 years of Allied attacks crumbled under artillery bombardments of unprecedented intensity. American forces advanced with close air support, mechanized transport and communication equipment that reflected industrial capabilities German forces could no longer match. What stunned German observers was not merely American numerical superiority, but the quality of American military adaptation. Officers who had dismissed Americans as mechanically minded but tactically naive watched American commanders demonstrate battlefield innovation that combined European military science with American industrial thinking. American forces used artillery like manufacturing tools, employing mathematical precision to destroy German positions with industrial efficiency. They treated ammunition as an unlimited resource, expending shells at rates that would have bankrupted European armies, but represented standard operating procedure for American industrial warfare. By August 1918, the cumulative impact of American deployment had fundamentally altered the strategic balance on the Western Front. German intelligence calculated that American forces would reach 1 million men within months, supported by industrial production that exceeded German capabilities by every measurable metric. The mathematical equation of attrition that had favoured Germany through 3 years of warfare had reversed decisively. German forces faced enemies with unlimited ammunition, unlimited replacement troops, and unlimited material resources. The final German reserves committed during the spring offensive had been consumed without achieving decisive victory. Meanwhile, American reinforcements continued arriving at rates that made German replacement impossible. Fresh American divisions rotated into combat while veteran German units fought with depleted strength and inadequate supplies. The industrial war of attrition that Germany had initiated now favoured the side with the largest factories rather than the most experienced soldiers. General Ludendorff, reviewing intelligence reports in his headquarters near Spa, Belgium, finally grasped the magnitude of German miscalculation. The Americans had not simply joined the war, they had industrialized warfare itself, creating a military machine that operated on principles of mass production rather than traditional military conservation. Every German tactical victory was offset by American industrial replacement. Every German advance was countered by American numerical superiority that grew daily rather than diminished through combat losses. The revolution in warfare that American arrival represented extended beyond mere troop numbers or equipment quantities. the United States had demonstrated that modern industrial democracies could mobilize resources on scales that exceeded the organizational capabilities of traditional military empires. American society had transformed its entire economic structure to support military objectives without sacrificing the individual initiative and mechanical aptitude that made American soldiers effective in combat. They had created a synthesis of democratic flexibility and industrial efficiency that German military doctrine had never encountered. As autumn approached in 1918, German strategic planning required acknowledgement of mathematical impossibility. American forces would soon exceed 2 million men supported by industrial production that doubled monthly rather than declined through wartime consumption. The race against time that had defined German strategy since April 1917 had been lost decisively, not through battlefield defeat but through industrial transformation that redefined the nature of modern warfare itself. The realization arrived not through battlefield reports or strategic briefings, but through a single telegram delivered to General Ludendorff's headquarters at 3:47 on the morning of September 12, 1918. Colonel Hans von Siegt, his hands trembling slightly from exhaustion rather than fear, placed the decoded message on Ludendorff's desk without ceremony. The words were stark in their mathematical brutality. American forces now numbered 1.2 million soldiers on French soil, with an additional 300,000 arriving monthly. The industrial statistics that followed read like the inventory of a civilization that had weaponized its entire economy. What German planners had calculated would take America 3 years to accomplish had been achieved in 18 months through methods that redefined the possible. Ludendorff studied the numbers in the pre-dawn silence, understanding that he was reading Germany's obituary written in production statistics and transport manifests. The Americans had not simply arrived, they had brought their factories with them. The Meuse-Argonne Offensive, launched on September 26th, provided German defenders with their first encounter with American industrial warfare operating at maximum capacity. Colonel Friedrich von Lossberg, architect of German defensive doctrine, watched through his field glasses as American artillery preparation began at 5:30 that morning. The bombardment that followed violated every principle of ammunition conservation that European armies had observed since 1914. American guns fired continuously for 4 hours, expending more shells than the German Eighth Army had received in the previous 3 months. The mathematical impossibility of such expenditure had become American standard operating procedure. Lieutenant Werner von Brauchitsch, commanding a machine gun company in the Argonne forest, recorded in his diary the psychological impact of facing American abundance. His unit had been allocated 2,000 rounds of ammunition to defend their sector, rationed carefully to ensure sustained resistance. The Americans advancing toward his positions fired that same quantity in 10 minutes of preparatory fire. Their soldiers carried more ammunition in individual loads than his entire company possessed collectively. The disparity created a form of combat shock that exceeded anything German medical doctrine had encountered. American forces participating in the Meuse-Argonne operation numbered 1.2 million soldiers, the largest military formation ever assembled under American command. General John J. Pershing, coordinating this massive deployment, commanded more troops than had participated in most entire European campaigns. The logistical achievement required to supply this force defied German comprehension of what transportation networks could sustain. American supply lines delivered 15,000 tons of ammunition daily across 400 miles of transport routes. German forces defending the sector received 300 tons of supplies weekly when weather permitted. The quality of American equipment reaching the battlefield reflected industrial priorities that treated military production as unlimited rather than rationed. Captain Ernst von Weizsäcker, examining captured American weapons, discovered rifles manufactured to tolerances that exceeded German precision engineering. American artillery pieces demonstrated metallurgical advances that German industry had abandoned as too expensive for mass production. Most remarkably, American forces discarded equipment that German units would have treasured as irreplaceable. Damaged vehicles were abandoned rather than repaired. Worn uniforms were replaced rather than mended. The Americans fought with the carelessness of infinite resources. German medical personnel treating wounded soldiers from both armies documented the physical disparity between combatants. American prisoners averaged 30 pounds heavier than German soldiers, reflecting nutritional advantages that persisted even under combat conditions. American field rations contained more protein than German soldiers received in weekly allocations. Medical supplies captured from American positions included pharmaceuticals that German civilian hospitals had not possessed since 1916. The Americans had brought their peacetime standard of living to the battlefield. By October 1918, the cumulative impact of American deployment had created strategic impossibilities that German military science could not resolve. American forces were advancing faster than German forces could retreat, supplied by transportation networks that operated at industrial rather than military efficiency. German commanders found themselves fighting delaying actions against enemies who possessed unlimited ammunition, unlimited medical supplies, and unlimited replacement personnel. Every tactical success was immediately offset by American numerical recovery that exceeded combat losses within days. The psychological transformation among German forces proved as decisive as any material disadvantage. Soldiers who had maintained discipline through 3 years of rationed existence began surrendering in unprecedented numbers when confronted with American abundance. Lieutenant Hans von Schirschke reported entire companies laying down arms after witnessing American supply convoys that stretched beyond the horizon. The knowledge that their enemies possessed unlimited resources while German forces conserved their final cartridges created despair that undermined resistance more effectively than any bombardment. American aviation units operating over German positions demonstrated industrial production capabilities that exceeded German manufacturing by orders of magnitude. Colonel Hermann Goering, commanding German fighter squadrons, calculated that American aircraft factories produced more planes weekly than German industry manufactured monthly. American pilots flew with mechanical confidence that reflected unlimited fuel supplies and replacement aircraft. German aviators conserved fuel and equipment like precious resources, while Americans operated with industrial abundance that treated losses as acceptable overhead. The railroad network supporting American operations revealed organizational capabilities that German logistics officers found incomprehensible. American engineers had constructed 1,000 miles of new railway lines, while simultaneously operating the largest military transportation system in history. Trains carrying American supplies operated on schedules that maintained precision despite transporting millions of tons of equipment across thousands of miles. German railway systems, once the pinnacle of European efficiency, could not match American transportation achievements using civilian infrastructure converted to military purposes. Intelligence reports reaching German headquarters described American industrial facilities that operated at production levels previously deemed theoretically impossible. The Bethlehem Steel Corporation had produced 20.1 million rounds of artillery ammunition, in addition to armor plate and forged military products. Single American factories outproduced entire German industrial regions. American shipyards launched transport vessels at rates exceeding German submarine sinking capabilities. The mathematical equation of industrial attrition had shifted decisively against German strategic planning. General Max von Gallwitz, commanding German forces opposite American positions, submitted reports that read like catalogues of industrial impossibility. American artillery units possessed more heavy guns than entire German army groups. American medical facilities treated casualties with equipment and medicines that exceeded German civilian hospital capabilities. American communication systems operated with electronic sophistication that German military technology could not match. The Americans had brought their industrial civilization to warfare, creating military capabilities that transcended traditional European military limitations. The Battle of Saint-Mihiel in September had provided German observers with a preview of American tactical competence, supported by unlimited resources. Over 500,000 American troops participated in operations that combined European military science with American industrial thinking. American commanders used artillery like manufacturing tools, applying mathematical precision to destroy German defensive positions with mechanical efficiency. The 4-day operation eliminated German positions that had been fortified for 3 years, demonstrating America's ability to apply industrial solutions to military problems. By November 1918, German strategic calculations required acknowledgement of complete defeat, not through battlefield losses, but through industrial exhaustion. American forces numbered over 2 million soldiers supported by production capabilities that doubled monthly rather than declined through wartime consumption. German reserves had been consumed without achieving decisive results, while American reinforcements continued arriving at rates that made German replacement mathematically impossible. The Armistice negotiations that began in early November reflected German recognition that continued resistance was militarily futile. General Wilhelm Groener, Ludendorff's replacement, understood that Germany faced not merely superior numbers, but a superior industrial civilization. The Americans had demonstrated that modern democracies could mobilize resources on scales that exceeded authoritarian efficiency. They had created military capabilities through industrial abundance rather than military discipline, achieving results that German military science had declared impossible. The final German positions on the Western Front were evacuated not through tactical defeat, but through strategic impossibility. German forces faced enemies with unlimited ammunition, unlimited replacement troops, and unlimited medical supplies. Every German tactical advantage was offset by American numerical superiority that grew daily through industrial production rather than diminish through combat losses. The war of attrition that Germany had initiated now favoured the side with the largest factories rather than the most experienced soldiers. Marshal Ferdinand Foch, accepting German surrender at Compiègne, acknowledged that American industrial mobilization had fundamentally altered the nature of modern warfare. The United States had transformed military conflict from contests of tactical skill to competitions of industrial capacity. Victory belonged not to the nation with the best soldiers, but to the civilization that could produce the most equipment, transport the most supplies, and sustain the largest forces through industrial rather than military efficiency. The German High Command's shock at America's arrival had evolved from tactical surprise to strategic transformation. What began as a miscalculation of American military capabilities had become recognition of an industrial revolution in warfare itself. The Americans had not simply joined the European war, they had redefined modern conflict through industrial abundance that made traditional military conservation obsolete. In his final report to the Kaiser, General Ludendorff wrote the epitaph for German strategic planning. The Americans possessed industrial capabilities that exceeded German military science's ability to comprehend or counter. They had brought unlimited resources to warfare, creating military advantages that transcended tactical skill or strategic planning. Germany had lost not through battlefield defeat, but through industrial transformation that rendered European military doctrine obsolete. The mathematics of victory, so carefully calculated in Berlin during April 1917, had been rewritten by a nation that treated warfare as industrial production rather than military art. The German Empire, master of European military science, had been educated in American mass production, at a cost measured in millions of casualties, and the collapse of a civilization that had dominated European affairs for half a century. The final accounting came not in dispatches or strategic assessments, but through the mundane bureaucracy of defeat. November 8, 1918. The cramped telegraph office in Spa, Belgium. Major General Wilhelm Groener sat hunched over a wooden desk scarred by countless urgent communications, his uniform wrinkled from 72 hours of continuous crisis management. The steady clicking of telegraph keys filled the room like mechanical insects, each transmission carrying fragments of an empire's dissolution. Before him lay casualty reports, supply inventories, and troop strength assessments that told the story of mathematical impossibility. German forces on the Western Front numbered 2.3 million men on paper. In reality, effective combat strength had fallen to fewer than 800,000. Meanwhile, American forces alone exceeded 2.1 million soldiers, with British, French, and Belgian armies adding another 4 million to Allied strength. What stunned Groener was not merely the numerical disparity, but the trajectory of those numbers. German strength decreased daily through casualties, disease, and desertion. American strength increased daily through arrivals that maintained industrial precision. For every German division that fell below combat effectiveness, 2 American divisions achieved operational readiness. The mathematics of attrition had become an exercise in inevitability. The industrial statistics arriving hourly painted an even grimmer picture of Germany's strategic position. American factories produced 100,000 artillery shells daily, while German ammunition plants struggled to manufacture 15,000 rounds weekly. American shipyards launched transport vessels faster than German submarines could sink them. American factories delivered 1,200 aircraft monthly, while the German aviation industry managed 300 aircraft in optimal conditions. The productive capacity that had enabled German victories in 1914 had been overwhelmed by American industrial mobilization that operated according to principles German economic planning had never encountered. Captain Hans von Seeckt entered the telegraph office carrying the morning intelligence summaries, his boots echoing on wooden floors worn smooth by 4 years of crisis management. The reports documented American supply convoys arriving at Le Havre with mechanical regularity, each delivery containing more equipment than entire German divisions possessed. American medical facilities treated casualties with pharmaceutical supplies that exceeded German civilian hospital inventories. American aviation units flew reconnaissance missions with fuel expenditures that would have grounded German squadrons for weeks. The psychological intelligence proved equally devastating. Intercepted American communications revealed morale that reflected confidence in unlimited support rather than concern about resource conservation. American soldiers wrote letters describing meals that contained more protein than German civilians had seen in months. American officers requisitioned equipment with casual assumptions of immediate replacement, violating every principle of military economy German doctrine considered essential. The Americans fought with the carelessness of infinite abundance, while German forces hoarded their final resources. The armistice signed at 11 a.m. on November 11, 1918 marked more than Germany's military defeat. It represented the moment when industrial democracy proved superior to military autocracy, when American mass production overwhelmed European military tradition. The German High Command had calculated victory through tactical brilliance and strategic planning. Instead, they discovered that modern warfare belonged to the nation, with the most factories, the largest supply lines, and the deepest industrial reserves. America had arrived not just with 1 million men, but with a revolution that transformed conflict itself into an exercise in manufacturing supremacy. The story of America's rise in World War I is more than history. It's proof that industrial power can reshape the world overnight. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of the war's most overlooked turning points, make sure to like the video, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Do you think any nation today could repeat what America accomplished in 1918? Let's talk about it below.